Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in. Welcome to the March NTSA Central Florida Tech Grove Connect webinar. I'm Carol Ann Logue, and I am delighted to be your host again this month. I am a director and co-founder of the Central Florida Tech Grove. Before we get into today's dialogue with our guest, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the Central Florida Tech Grove, who we are, and why our relationship with NTSA is so vital to us. If you are not familiar with what is in Orlando, Florida, it is the epicenter of the Department of Defense acquisition and much of the drivers for the research for human performance through simulation and training for our nation's military. The slide that you see on the screen right now, the 4 services are the anchors of Team Orlando, but as you can see from all those logos, we are in a community that's very multifaceted of many federal agencies and departments in national security and DoD, all who have individuals on the ground here in Orlando executing research and development and acquisition and contracting for training and simulation products for our men and women in the military. It's a very large community, and our relationship with the National Training and Simulation Association is very vital to what we do. The Central Florida Tech Grove, we opened our doors about 4 years ago. We are a DoD innovation center, much like some of the other centers you've probably heard of, AFWorks, SoftWorks, all those works out there. We are in that community and proud to work alongside many of those organizations. Our focus is human performance. And what you see along the bottom are the logos of our customers and our funders. One thing that is unique about Tech Grove is because we sit on top of Team Orlando, we are funded by all 4 services, in some cases, multiple parts of some of the services, as well as some other defense agencies. And there are others that are on their way in to join us. And this is a collaboration between the DoD and the University of Central Florida Research Foundation to operate Central Florida Tech Grove. Here's where we focus: NTSA, simulation and training, human performance, military readiness, and all those things that enable that. Many of you are familiar with what those acronyms are, and hopefully that list of enabling technologies and capabilities along the bottom, all of you see yourself somewhere in that. We have 3 main goals at Tech Grove, just like all of our other DoD innovation centers that we collaborate with out there. It is to bring more participants into the defense industry base, more industry of all sizes, particularly small, highly innovative companies, as well as large companies, more academia, even other parts of the government that have innovative cutting edge solutions that could be applied to the areas that we're supporting our government customers in. So growing that defense industrial base, helping support the transfer and transition of technology, whether it's through marketing intellectual property that our government laboratories have, or supporting companies with SBIR and other transaction authorities or other forms of government funding to develop innovative solutions and helping them get visibility and opportunities to find customers and collaborators, and then absolutely solving problems for our customers. And we do that through a number of different initiatives that we execute depending on what the problem and the need is of our government customer. We have a lot of opportunities, a lot of initiatives, different opportunities to network, to learn, to engage in dialogue with other industry, academia, government. You can see a list of some of the problem-solving initiatives that we have. I hope that you will visit our website. If you are not part of our Tech Grove community, I hope you will go to our website, fill out that contact us form, so you will be able to stay aware of opportunities for you to engage with us and our customers and help us rapidly innovate solutions for the military. Just a couple of slides to give you some real-time examples of some of the opportunities we have. You see there's a list of this month's events that are public-facing. Anything that's on that flyer or on the website you can participate in. We have a great partnership with a lot of really key foundational companies such as NVIDIA in this space. We are live streaming in the opening keynote from their annual GTC AI conference next Monday. If you're in the Orlando area, come on over around 3:30 and join us. There will be members of the NVIDIA team there, and we'll have a lot of fun and be a lot of energy as we hear the latest insights into what is happening in the world of AI. And to continue, in a couple of weeks, what we will be talking about here on this webinar, Calibration of Trust in AI, our quarterly mixology event will be taking place at Tech Grove. It is a hybrid. You can join us virtually if you're not local. Go to our website. You can register for that. You'll see our guest experts that we will be bringing in to dialogue, in some cases debate, various opinions and perspectives on what, why, and the consequences of trust or distrust in AI and why it's so important and why it matters. Join our community, stay in touch with us because we would love to engage you beyond just participation in this webinar. Now we're going to move on to why you're all really here, and that is to hear our guest experts that are joining us this morning. This webinar series does shine a spotlight on the team, the research, the innovation, the insights that are captured in those best paper nominees and best tutorials from the most recent ITSEC. This month, obviously, we are focusing on the paper that was authored primarily by our two guests today. And we had a lot of questions that were submitted as all of you registered. Some very good questions. In fact, I think we're going to pull some of those questions into our mixology event as well. We will not get to all of those questions because there were a lot of them, but I will tell you that as Beth and Sandro go through their presentation and remarks, a lot of those questions will be touched on and addressed. While we're in this webinar, over the next 50 minutes or so, if you have a question that arises or a comment you'd like to provide, please put it in the Q&A on the platform. I will also be uploading the paper from ITSEC to the chat, so take a look at that. And if you've not had a chance to read the paper, I would hope that you would do so. And because someone will ask, I will make sure you know that this is being recorded. Within about 48 hours, the recording of this webinar will be available on the NTSA website. Just go to past events on their event page, and you will see not only the recording of today's webinar, but recordings of all of the previous Tech Growth Connect webinars that we've had the opportunity to do. With that, let's bring in our wonderful guest, Beth Hartzell. Beth, who was until recently with CAE when she authored this paper, has gone back, I guess, Beth, right, to the Air Force, where she is a senior psychologist at the Army, at the Air Force Research Lab. I work with research psychologists at the Army Research Lab as well. So, yeah, delighted to have you here with us, Beth, today. And then Sandro Scielso, hopefully got that close, who is a Human Systems Technical Authority and Learning Science Fellow at CAE USA. Quite the title, but I think what it says to all of you, both he and Beth have deep expertise in this area. And with that, turn it over to the two of you so you can share your wonderful work with us. Thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol, for that introduction. And thanks everybody for joining us on this special, I'm going to call it a Pi Day presentation. So we'd also like to recognize our co-authors, Dr. Spencer Cohn, Alvin Abraham, and Rachel Wong, as for all their work on this too. As she said, we're excited to share our findings as well as the next steps. So with that, I will turn it over to Sandro to kind of talk about the history and the lead up to this current effort.
Thank you, Beth. So I speak a lot better when standing up, so I'll try my best to sound coherent while I'm sitting here. But we wanted to present a little bit of what we call a genesis of all this R&D effort under human-machine teaming. So it's not a new topic, right? Human factors been investigating this for decades. But recently, there's enough maturity in the technology where we saw that we could have direct implications on the warfighter, the interfaces they use to have that collaborative interface with machines and with synthetic agents. So what we've done, and you can see on the top left, from 2020 to 2022, we kind of scoured everything that was out there in terms of performing a comprehensive literature review on all the taxonomies that existed on human-machine teaming. And what we wanted to create was to create this human-machine team multi-domain theoretical framework for the warfighter. And you don't need to be reading, everything in this framework. This is just a visual snapshot to show you that there's really three main elements that we determined were going to be critical to create those interfaces. On the blue swim lane is to model trust. And the idea is that, as you will see, it's a key construct along with situational awareness and shared situational awareness that teams have to have, regardless of whether they're human-human teams or human-machine teams. So we need to be able to model trust objectively and in real time, and we need to do this by looking at biobehavioral markers. Where can you get them? Depending on your case, your use case, and your domain, it's probably different availability of sensors that are there. So that's that first part, right? How to generate a model of trust in real time that is diagnostic of trust-related behaviors. Then the green swim lane in the middle is how, now that we have that trust in real time, what do we do with it, right? How do we maintain trust? And we'll see later on in the slides, we're going to talk about calibrated trust, which is really essential to prevent either over or under trust. And finally, the yellow swim lane at the bottom, how do you facilitate trust? What kind of multimodal modes do you have available to coordinate, collaborate with your team that's made of other humans and machines? And that depends, of course, on your platforms, use cases, so on and so forth. So we were able to have this framework to basically guide the research we wanted to do. So now switch your attention to the right-hand side. What we've done in 2023 is to build that human-machine team virtual test range, which basically puts on a multi-domain constructive network, we're using MACE, a number of simulated platforms where we can have either constructive platforms or human operated platforms. And we decided, okay, this is going to be our proving grounds, if you will, of all that theory that's being generated. So what we wanted to do, if you look at the red insert at the bottom, we really wanted to accelerate applied and advanced human subject research in human machine teaming to really come up with, the requirements of what works and what doesn't work depending on use cases, constraints, so on and so forth. So what we're going to present now, like Beth said, is the paper that was presented at ITSEC last year that's based on an applied view of HMT research. So with this, I will move on to the next chart. Chart is a little busy, so it's we're going to focus on top at first. So a lot of you, I've seen in the questions that were submitted, a strong human factors background. Human factors, of course, is critical. The research and trust in automation is not recent, right? It goes way back. And I picked, if you look at the time ribbon, I picked the 60s kind of as an initial point because of the Sheridan and Verplank taxonomy of robotic teleoperations underwater. That was the first taxonomy that looks at level of autonomy. What does the human have to do? What does the robot have to do? And how you achieve your task in that collaborative fashion. So I call it, that's the nascent part of human-machine collaboration. But at that point, machines were really tools that help you achieve your own aims. You move to the 80s, and if you think about, airlines and plane autopilots, whether it's civil or defense, there's a lot of automation that happens there. And I would like to bring up the next well-known taxonomy of, I don't know why it switched to the last slide. There you go. The next well-known taxonomy from Micah Ainsley, and so the Ainsley and Caber taxonomy. That one focused more on that on the cognitive needs of to perform this collaborative decision making between you and your automation. So another great taxonomy. You move to the 20s, this decade, things are getting a lot more complicated because we're anthropomorphizing a lot of our relationship with machines because of the advance of AI, where you can have a more human-like collaborative interface with your synthetic agents. So as humans, we are, whether we like it or not, we're deeply affective animals, basically, and we have that need for trust into something that should be like another human. So a lot of complexity has been added, and we're going to look at the impact of that complexity. But it's not just the anthropomorphization of synthetic agents that behave more like humans. If you look at 2030s and beyond, it's also operating many different kind of autonomous entities, all the way up to swarms, where an operator will be in charge of dozens, if not hundreds of swarms in some cases. And how do you make that work? Right? So we call it the next frontier in human factors, because the problems of the past have not been completely solved, and now we're introducing a lot more complexity. Thus, as scientists, we really need to move a lot faster in determining what works and what doesn't work. So I will now, this concept, we call it from tools to teammates. It's the concept that machines used to be tools to support us achieve our goals, but now there are more like human teammates, whereby we need to collaborate and coordinate to achieve those mission goals. And why is this happening? It is in part driven by future warfare requirements. And the idea, if you look at the purple first insert on the left-hand side, is we want to reduce the cognitive burden of the human operators while promoting that coordination. This workload mitigation happens through effective human-machine team interactions. And how can we get effective human-machine team interactions? Well, trust is that key construct that mediates those interactions and whether or not they're effective. So if you look at the blue insert at the bottom left, it's not just having trust, but the right level of trust. And when you achieve that right level of trust, and we'll get into that into a second, you achieve higher lethality, theoretically, and lower human endangerment, which is one of the main goals, while achieving your mission objectives. Thus, we have a clear and present need to measure trust objectively and in real time. And this is just not us saying this. This is really the Department of Defense, communities of interest, rolling out roadmaps on what is very critical for the scientific community to determine and discover and answer in terms of those human autonomous system interactions and collaboration, what works, what doesn't work, what we need to focus on. And you can see some of those bullet points. I'm not going to go through everything, but calibrated trust and transparency is a key item to promote those interactions and collaboration. You see our goal at the bottom? Our goal is that continuous trust measurement for real-time optimization of human-machine collaborative interfaces is what's at stake here. So we really want to get to a point where we can measure that trust in real time in order to create those adaptive interfaces that will optimize the collaborative nature of human-machine teaming. A little bit of definitions, right? I've seen some of the questions. What's a team? What is trust? So at the very high level, a team, and think about human teams, even your colleagues at work, right? a team involves this notion that you have to depend on someone else to achieve a goal. So there's a little bit of that vulnerability. And if you look at the definition of trust really is that willingness to be vulnerable. Say, I'm okay to be vulnerable because I know my teammate will do their job. So that willingness to be vulnerable and depend on someone else to meet each other's expectation is the key element of trust in terms of a definition that we're honing in on. And in order to achieve that, human machine teams must capitalize on the unique strength of humans and machines. And in the past, humans have been seen as, we tend to be pretty flexible, creative, innovative, great at pattern recognitions, although frankly, machines are catching up there, so it's a little scary. And machines, we tend to see them as consistent, fast, and accurate as general heuristics. So when you look at that together, that calibrated trust basically is you trusting the machine at the right level for what it is designed to do. And when you are calibrated, when your trust is properly calibrated, you have that optimal situation awareness and shared situation awareness and manageable workload. You're using the system for what it is designed. If you either overtrust or distrust, then that's a negative outcome that can lead to human error. And that's exemplified on the right-hand side of this slide. And you see our key sentence there, that knowing user trust level is imperative to optimize trust calibration techniques, such as information transparency. And you can see the graph represents that. You see the x-axis is your system reliability. We cannot assume the system to be 100% reliable 100% of the time. So you need to be able to trust based on your understanding of the system reliability operational constraints that are happening at any given time. So correctly trusting or correctly distrusting the system is a key element. Thus the need for human machine trust measures, and I will pass it on to Beth to elaborate on that.
Sorry, I was just posting a quick answer. Awesome. So thanks, Sandro, for sharing that. So given this emphasis on accurate trust calibration, whether it's high or low, we wanted to create a novel trust measure that can be used for real-time trust or to assess real-time trust levels in teaming situations. So the measure that we put together is the CONES, the Continuous Online Numerical Scale. For this task, it asks participants to respond using a 5-point Likert scale. You can kind of see it, I realize you guys can't see my mouse, but this gray square kind of superimposed on the map. Participants are shown the scale and asked to respond using it, where 1 corresponds to a lack of trust in the system and 5 indicates total trust. So as you can see in this example, it's pretty much, excuse me, unobtrusive, and the measure itself can be easily incorporated into most task environments. So consequently, it's also suitable for many either experimental or operational contexts. So in our initial evaluation, which we're presenting here, the CONES, we expected that the CONES would serve as a lightweight alternative to some traditional trust measures, with the potential of using the tool down the road for validating other new measures. Excuse me. So our overarching thesis was that any objective indicators that we included would correspond to the subjective ratings obtained through the CONES. So to explore this, we developed a virtual urban search and rescue, or SAR, mission that represents the aftermath from a F4 tornado going through downtown Houston, Texas. So as part of the task, participants received flight path recommendations to help them locate and deliver supplies to the survivors, but it was up to them to either accept or reject the suggestions. This kind of gets into the answer I just provided. So in this context, we predicted that participants would trust ratings would correspond to their acceptance or rejection. Thank you, Sandra. So the area of operation for these missions is indicated in this outlined dark section on the map, and it's towards the center of each map. So for half the trials, they were completed under high workload, meaning that participants had 8 drones to explore an area that was about 3.6 square miles, compared to the low workload, where they had 4 drones to search an area that was about 1.9 square miles. So we also manipulated the quality of flight path recommendations. So unlike the workload conditions, though, participants weren't informed of any differences in the recommendation quality. So go ahead and switch to our video here. So in the SAR task, each drone had to be tasked individually. Survivors were found if a drone passed within 100 meters of their location, and the color of the marker indicating their location indicated the type of supplies they needed. Each mission included 20 survivors. So this particular clip represented a high workload mission operating 8 drones simultaneously. Switch back here. While receiving poor quality recommendations. So throughout each mission, participants could interact with the cone's rating at any time. It remained visible in that lower left-hand side of the screen. So they could update at any time, but they also received prompts every 45 seconds.
Beth, I'm curious, how aware were the participants in this exercise of what your research objective was, that you were measuring trust, or did that impact at all?
Yeah, of course. No, it's a great question. So obviously, kind of like, I guess, any other psychology experiment, we wanted to tell them enough to kind of get them engaged, but not so much to give it away. So for this particular task, we told them that we were interested in investigating an interface that would allow them to work with like an artificial teammate. But we made sure to emphasize to them that it was just the interface, like how you control the drones and that type of thing, and no indication of, like there were variations in the recommendation quality. Awesome, thank you. So participants completed 4 missions. They were 12 minutes long, which are captured on the left-hand side of the screen there. So the order in which these were presented was counterbalanced, and participants got a 5-minute break in between. You could also see under the indicator for high workload or low workload, letters G and P alternating. So this indicates the recommendation quality that participants were shown. Each of the 12-minute missions was divided into 4 blocks of 3 minutes. And so the quality alternated between these 3 blocks. So good recommendations indicated with a G, suggested paths into unexplored areas, whereas poor recommendations marked with P either recommended participants through no-fly zones, which are the little sections you can see indicated in the red boxes, or else to deliver the wrong types of supplies. So a survivor marked with the green icon should get supplies from the green base, but instead the bad recommendations would recommend supplies from the yellow hub. So kind of getting into some questions we've had already, participants' behaviors in response to the recommendations was one of our main objective indicators of their trust in completing this task, particularly in whether they chose to review the suggestions before responding. So we can kind of go back just to see this a bit. In a few seconds, you'll see the recommendation here pop up on the left. So if participants chose to accept the recommendation without reviewing the recommended path that indicated compliance or high levels of trust. Choosing to read a recommendation before accepting or rejecting it demonstrated imperfect trust, which we categorized as verification. And then finally, low trust or rejection was demonstrated by them rejecting recommendation without reading it all. So for the actual traditional task, performance was measured as the number of survivors found, how many supplies were received, and how many survivors died without receiving care. This only 5% of the survivors were at risk of dying if they didn't receive supplies fast enough, but there was such a low number, it wasn't worth analyzing further. So in their subjective responses to the cones, participants indicated an overall low trust in the system with an average rating just a bit below 2.5. So remember, this was out of a 5-point scale, 1 to 5. Our analyses found no significant differences in the trust ratings for either the workload manipulation or the quality of the flight recommendations. And there were also no consistent correlations between cones rating and the responses to either NASA TLX index or task load index or Schaefer's HRI. So in response to the flight recommendations, nearly 82% of responses were made after verification, meaning that they chose to review the recommendation, followed by rejection and compliance. Analyses of these behaviors, though, revealed that the quality of the recommendations at the start of the mission, so that first 3-minute block, were the heaviest influencers of participants' likelihood of accepting or rejecting flight path suggestions throughout the rest of that 12-minute mission. So in regards to the SAR task performance, we found that participants performed pretty well, on average finding 87% of the tornado survivors and delivering supplies to 71%. As hypothesized, though, more survivors were located during the low rather than the high workload conditions. And then, so in the task itself, this equated to nearly 2 additional survivors being found in each low workload condition. There were, however, no differences for the number of survivors who either received supplies or died between the 2 conditions. And here's when we get into our more exciting results. Sorry, have a little furry helper here. So most relevant to the study's thesis was determining whether the cone's ratings correlated with objective trust behaviors. This was assessed by linking each of the recommendations, responses, so whether they reviewed, accepted, or rejected it, with participants' most recent trust rating on the cones. I should say most recent previous rating. So the figure here on the left summarizes the distribution of the trust ratings by the 3 behavior types: rejection, verification, and compliance. So results of a chi-square analysis confirmed that there was a significant relationship between these 2 metrics, thus demonstrating that compliance increased in conjunction with increases in the cone's trust ratings with a medium effect size. So this finding is especially relevant given the criticality of properly calibrated trust in battlefield operations, which will be increasingly important as we use AI to maximize lethality in these contexts. So with that, I will turn it back over to Sandra.
Thank you, Beth. So you can see how we're pretty excited that we have found a measure that would yield data that's indicative of trust-related behaviors. So when you look at the conclusions and takeaways, summary for the cons metric is that we did demonstrate its utility during operational task live. And one of the main takeaways is that we found that level of trust is directly proportional to recommendation compliance and rejection. So that was exciting right there. We also found that capturing continuous trust attitudes would then predict, distrust behaviors. So we know we're on the right track. However, there were some issues with inconsistent frequency of responses. Like Beth mentioned, every 45 seconds, participants were prompted to enter their trust level because we wanted this to be a continuous measure. That saliency of the prompt was enough for some participants, but definitely not enough from other participants, where we had our experimenter that would have to verbally really prompt them to enter their response. So there's a little bit of error that was introduced there. And then what's the best time interval, right? We picked 45 seconds. That is absolutely dictated by the pace of your use case. So you have to pilot that, right? If you ask them to enter their trust every 5 seconds, it's going to be silly no matter what. And if you ask them to enter their trust every 5 minutes, then you don't get enough instances. So finding, that right level, that right interval is something that really needs to be looked at. In terms of study manipulations, it was interesting that we found workload affected performance, but not trust. And conversely, we found that recommendations affected trust and not performance. So some potential explanations, perhaps manipulations insufficiently tasked. Okay, that's a tough word in morning. Task cognitive resources. Remember that most of our participants were either active duty or retired military. They can take a lot on. So perhaps we didn't have enough tasking. And also, there were no consequences for accepting poor recommendations. Nothing really bad would happen in the way that you wanted to change your behavior. So it's something to think about to answer why workload affected performance and not trust. Moving on. So we mentioned earlier, we want to accelerate the speed of science. And, I've been in this business for 20 plus years. And one of the biggest frustrations is that science takes time and is very expensive. So future warfare is not going to wait, right? OEMs are already building all these collaborative combat agents, synthetic agents, and whatnot. Interfaces are being built. And like usual, the frustration from a human factor scientist is that it's going to take human error. It's going to take a catastrophic event for finally, fixing things. Here, the opportunity, though, is that this is nascent enough. We're ahead of the curve, if you will, in a way that we can really inform the design of effective human-machine team interfaces. So I think that's the exciting part. That's what we really wanted to promote with the paper. And for us, what does it mean? In this experiment that Beth mentioned, we collected a lot of data that we didn't get a chance to analyze, including eye tracking data. So you may know that there's a relationship between eye tracking as a trust-related behavior and trust itself. If you micromanage the interface of your synthetic agent, it means you don't trust it, and that's something you can get from eye tracking. So we're definitely going to look at that. Using cones in advanced research, and by advanced research, we're talking about a real military simulated and constructive military platform in a complex modeling and simulation environment. We want to test that in that environment. And we think we can do it with minimal disruption by using cones. And you can see on the notional figure on your right-hand side, an additional, let's call it a screen interface between the pilot and their collaborative combat agents. And in this case, you have your common, your COP, your common operating picture, where you can interact with assets. And then on the left-hand side, you have a notional panel on how you would command those CCAs. So here, and you can see at the bottom, you have the trust measure, that 5-point scale. So they would enter those labels there. And that's, if you look at the last point at the bottom left, this is really the next big step for us, is to collect those trust labels, if you will, to train a machine learning model for real-time trust. we've partnered with the Southern Methodist University, and we're very excited to see what can happen. To further support this notion that we have to accelerate the speed of science, we need to maximize the synergies between applied and advanced research. We've done, so what you've seen now is an example of what can be done in an applied setting. Now we need to move to advanced research, what works into specific military use cases. And the HMT virtual test range that I brought up at the beginning of this webinar, we've expanded its capabilities. And you can see here a notional representation of having manned assets and unmanned collaborative assets working in complex scenarios. The key, though, is to have that human-in-the-loop aircrew training platform where we can, and if you look at the right-hand side, we can evaluate trust calibration in this high-fidelity environment. This will facilitate the rapid testing of various HMT hypotheses, what kind of design works, what kind of level of transparency works. Now that I know your trust is high, how we're going to change the interface. So all these really very interesting hypotheses that we have on how to calibrate trust, we can test them, we can see their effectiveness. And the bottom point is, we want to test collaborative combat agent behaviors. How do you optimize that relationship between the human agent and the human? So we want to accelerate validation of adaptive human-machine interfaces and simulate all domain future warfare environments. The idea is that perhaps we can get to a point where we can generate requirements that OEMs or anybody who's involved with designing these interfaces can take them. So that really is one of our main goals. And so the revelation is, we all think we have a lot to contribute. We all think our approach is a great approach. And the truth is that it takes a village. And in this case, the best collaboration, and this is why we're so thankful that we're presenting at the Tech Grove, is really we want to illustrate the power of the trifecta. And by the trifecta, we mean industry, military, and academia. This is a explosive combination. So if we are able to promote that collaboration, I think we can really accelerate the speed of science in a way that's going to matter. You can see some of the logos there. They represent isolated efforts, but how can we continue promoting this trifecta, if you will? So some of you in the audience may have your own human-machine teaming projects. We'd love to hear from you on what you think could be beneficial to accelerate science. So we're all ears. And a way to achieve that is we all need to have this vision, this roadmap of what we need to tackle first. So for closing remarks, I'm going to pass it back to Beth, who will touch on that.
It helps if I unmute. So as we wrap up, we also wanted to acknowledge some of the resources that provided a lot of information to for our defense-oriented roadmap for this work. So the first is what you see there on the left. It's the 2022 report from AFRL 711th Human Performance Wing, which emphasized requirements for effective human AI teaming. And then the other is the DoD's publication that Sandro mentioned right at the start, looking at a multi-agency approach and how DoD would best assess the utility of humans in autonomous systems toward completing mission goals. So with that, we just wanted to have a big thanks to everybody for attending this morning, and then of course Tech Grove for allowing us this opportunity to dig into this content again. And then we've enjoyed participating in the discussion so far, and totally open to any following questions. So if there's anything else that folks would like to discuss that we can't address today, please feel free to reach out to, babbling on. So please feel free to reach out to either Sandra or I for more information. Now you can see our contact information here. So,
Beth, Sandra, I noticed, and I'm curious about your observations and that of others who are with us today that were at ITSEC and perhaps some of the other defense-related events that are taking place. But I noticed a obvious quantity, I guess, of papers, presentations, talks about this topic, trust in AI, calibration of trust in AI, different forms of it. I can tell you that here at TechGrove, in our customer base, which is all focused on human performance, human machine interface, simulation and training, this is a growing crescendo of conversation about this. As I mentioned, we're doing one of our TechGrove events later this month on this very topic, where we'll have a follow-up to that as well. Our webinar next month, our TechGrove Connect webinar next month, is in this general space as well. What that says to me is that awareness, not just in DoD, but across the board, actually, because what industry is not talking about AI, right? And the pros and cons, the concerns, the excitement, but particularly when you are in situations where there are lives at stake, there's freedom at stake, there's so much at stake, it's particularly imperative to grapple with this topic. Beth, you're back in the Air Force now, on the government side. And I know you haven't been back there very long, but you have long connections. So what are you hearing now within the Air Force community as compared to maybe what you heard a year or two ago in terms of the attention to this and the realization that this kind of calibration has to be woven in?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's definitely a concern in many different areas, especially as, like, one thing that's particularly relevant for the Air Force is that as they're trying to integrate the CCA element, the collaborative, I'm sorry, thank you. It's just so many acronyms.
Yes.
Yeah, so that, I mean, as we're continuing to integrate so many novel technologies, and I think, and again, this is personal opinion from my observations, is that so often amazing technologies are adopted and handed out to warfighter, airmen, guardians, whoever it may be, and they're told to use this, but so little work is done to make sure that it's what they necessarily need, and so that trust ends up being kind of an afterthought. And so I think it's fantastic that we're getting to a point now, research-wise, where we're emphasizing that all of these tools are useless if somebody is told to rely on this thing and they feel they can't trust it. If it's like a black box situation, they don't understand how it works, how it's coming up with an answer, then yeah, that it would be worse than not having the tools. So,
Sandra, what's your perspective on?
Oh, I was going to say Beth is spot on. And let me go back to the previous slide, right? Because there's different schools of thoughts going from zero trust architectures, right? Where a pilot or a warfighter directly controls, like in the loop for every synthetic agent behaviors, all the way down to, the AI can do it, can do everything, right? Let's just blindly trust that the automation will work. And if you look at these resources that Beth mentioned, they laid out a programmatic roadmap on what is key for science and technology to answers across the next 15 years. So it's a pretty long roadmap. I really strongly suggest you to access those resources and to see how the collective scientific community sees as what needs to be answered in terms of the research gaps that we currently have to really optimize that human-machine teaming efficiency. So I think that's the most important element. We all need to converge into this common mission that we have and common research roadmap. And again, the notion of the trifecta is that we all need to collaboratively be able to figure this out at a healthy pace.
Mm-hmm. I was in a conversation the other day about where are we headed in terms of really needing to ensure that there's a basic level of AI literacy more broadly, right, in the population, and especially so with an urgency in perhaps sectors like the military or healthcare, where they're relying extensively on AI, or all sorts of these industries where really there's lives on the line and really critical decisions. And that's not an easy question to figure out how to answer. So, any thoughts?
No, I mean, I think I'd kind of, at least personally, I'd kind of refer back to some of what Sandro said about how this is developing. Yeah, and the need to inform the users that, the lab that I'm in, they're working on developing a mission planning and debrief agent that could be, it's demonstrated to be massively beneficial in helping to develop and communicate a mission, and then providing a more objective debrief experience. But people need to understand the limitations of this technology, that yes, it's fantastically beneficial as long as it just keep it in its little box, and to help manage these expectations. And then at the same time that they properly understand how to use it, that if it's a lack of experience with it, or if they see it as kind of intimidating, then it just kind of sits in the corner unused, and they could suffer some problems just from not being able to use that as part of their toolkit.
Sandra, I'm curious from your perspective, one of the concerns that I have based on what I see working with our government customers we do is that data integrity's having the data that you need in a format that you can use, and it being collected in a consistent manner over time to be able to adequately train the AI models. I worry about that. Should I be worried or not? So.
Yes.
Yeah, you should absolutely be worried about that, and it would probably take another webinar to address how to train your teams. But that's kind of the where the market needs to go in terms of understanding what how do you optimally train with the machines. And like Beth was saying, technology acceptance. I mean, think about even decades back when we introduced automated systems in the cockpit for ground avoidance, and the pilots hated it. They're like, I don't need nannies to tell me what to do, but it ended up saving lives. So that acceptance is what's critical, and trust is an effective construct at its essence. And what we would say, operationalizing that is difficult. And like you said, there's different elements of trust. There's your own bag of biases that you bring to the table just from the start. That's your dispositional trust. And we've seen generational differences whereby older operators are more distrustful than younger operators. Just to give you an example, we have a capability for a synthetic instructor pilot to train cadets on basic maneuvers. We're failing that. And the biggest feedback that we get is, oh, this is a great tool, but I'd love to communicate to that synthetic instructor just like I communicate with my real human instructor pilot. That comes from that young generation of pilots. So they're already pre-wired to trust that level of collaborative decision making with synthetic agents. So I think, it's very complex. It's obviously, the bottom line, we really need to have a sense of how we can expedite science to really provide, like Beth said, interfaces that are intuitive to promote that collaborative aspect between the human and the machines.
Yeah. Yes, I'm looking to see if there are some questions in the Q&A that maybe we haven't addressed in our last few minutes. The most recent question: your research focused on simulation of human-machine teaming of UASs. Would you say your results with respect to trust would be different if ground-based systems were leveraged? And highly relevant question, because you've got air, ground, sea, very different environments. And do you have enough thoughts or just projection of thoughts on how your model might work or your tool might work in those settings?
Personally, I think, at least based on our experience here, I think it would still be useful in any ground-based applications, partially because, like, the complexity of the task, participants didn't have to consider, like, the world as being three-dimensional, so they didn't have to worry about, like, altitude changes. Although, to be fair, they also didn't have to worry about navigating around buildings. But yeah, I think in that context, it would still be very useful. Although I'm not sure what Sandro thinks too.
No, I agree. And one of the big insights, maybe we can go back there. Is there? Let me see. Let me try to quickly scroll back to our multimodal framework. So every environment is going to have a number of constraints. So what we're trying to do here with applied research is to find rules that apply everywhere. But of course, when you do your advanced research, then you're limited in the number of sensors that you can gather based on the constraints of your environment. So that's going to dictate what you can do. Ideally, absolutely, we want a generalized model of trust. But in practice, we know that it's going to take a while for us to get there. So what you're going to end up is models that work for your particular domain constraints. So yeah, I think that at least that's a beginning of an answer. It's really complex to get to a generalized model, but that certainly is the intent.
Just as we start to wind up here, the last question I like to always ask our guest experts, and you alluded to it somewhat in your comments, Sandro, but what would be beneficial for you from our audience to continue to move this forward? It sounds like potential collaborators, potential opportunities to test out your model in other environments. Is that correct? And what else?
I'll let Sandro start with that one.
Yes, to all of the above. I think we built the virtual test range that you see on the right to do that rapid research. We have warfighters on tap as participants at any point in time in our campus in in Arlington, Texas.
Orlando too.
we have offices in Orlando, but all our the main campus is in Arlington. So my idea is that let's continue that collaboration, even if it's just a discussion. Whether that leads to collaborative agreements, research agreements, research projects. I think, of course, we all want to do that, but let's have that discussion. Let's see how we can leverage each other's strength. So we're in contact with OEMs. They're designing their interfaces. Let's say, hey, let's test your interfaces right now in our lab and give you the good, the bad, and the ugly, so you can tune it before it's fielded, before it is put into operation. That's just an example, right? So you're completely right. We need to have this healthy conversation to promote science.
Okay. Well, thank you, Beth, Sandro, so much for joining us today. It's one of those webinar presentations that prompts more questions than answers. And it's going to be true of this topic for a long time. Just for all of you, thank you for hanging in there with us. I did put in the chat the link to register for our Tech Grove Mixology event next week, which will be continuing this conversation with some government subject matter experts on calibration of trust in AI. I hope all of you will keep an eye out for the announcement from NTSA for our next Tech Connect webinar in April 11th, where we will be joined by the team behind the Best Paper nominee at ITSEC, Wires Crossed in a Digital World, How to Prevent Misalignments in Human and AI Decision Making. Thank you again. Thanks for being here. I hope all of you have a great weekend.
Thank you.